In 1985, Ford Motor Company introduced a car that could out-accelerate a Ferrari 308 GTB Quattro 0 to 60 in 7 seconds flat. A turbocharged, rear-wheel drive German sport coupe, largely hand-built by Carmen of Osnabrück. Automotive journalists gave it glowing reviews. Car and Driver called it fast. Road and Track praised its handling. It was, on paper, exactly the car America said it wanted. 5 years later, Ford had sold just over 42,000 of them. To put that number in perspective, in 1985, Ford's sales figures for the F-150 were approximately 11,188 per week. Ford built the German car that could, sort of, outrun an Italian exotic, and at the end of the day, most people never learned how to pronounce its name. This is a story of Merkur, the brand Ford spent millions creating and millions more ensuring nobody would buy. By the mid-1980s, America had a new kind of car buyer, young, affluent, and professional. Mainstream media called these people yuppies. They had money, and they loved spending it on cars. Just not American ones. They bought BMWs, Mercedes, Saabs, Audis. What they did not buy were Lincolns or Mercurys. They were not even given a passing glance. For Ford, this was an existential problem. The most desirable demographic in the market was walking past their dealerships. Cadillac and Oldsmobile had the same problem. GM's diesel engine debacle and the infamous V8 6.4 cylinder deactivation system hadn't exactly enticed an entire generation of luxury buyers. Ford, however, couldn't blame the diesel blocks. Their problem was much simpler. They had nothing to sell. Ford had to do something or they risked missing out on a lucrative new segment of the market. Enter Bob Lutz, former BMW executive, current head of Ford of Europe, and a man with a plan. Lutz had recently overseen the development of a radical new vehicle for the European market, the Ford Sierra. It was a product of the late 1970s when Ford didn't have the money to redesign its entire assembly line for front-wheel drive platforms like its competitors. So Lutz took a different approach. He made the car slippery. The Sierra, designed by a Franco-German team of Patrick Lecquemont and Uwe Bahnsen, had a drag coefficient that embarrassed most sports cars. It looked like nothing else on the road, grille-less, flush glass, and even a biplane rear spoiler on the high-performance XR4i variant. While the styling may have been divisive, the performance certainly was not. The XR4i was powered by a 2.8-liter Cologne V6. It handled brilliantly. European reviewers began comparing it to the BMW 3 Series. Lutz, who had once worked at BMW, saw the obvious implication. Here was a car that could fight the Germans on their own terms, and it was wearing a Ford badge. He flew to Dearborn and made his case to CEO Donald Peterson. Peterson was an interesting but ideal audience for this pitch, a tall, imposing former Marine officer. Colleagues called him the Smiling Cobra. He had come up through Ford of Europe himself. He understood what Lutz was describing. He approved the project. Ford would spend roughly $50 million, about $150 million in today's money, to Americanize the Sierra XR4i and sell it as a BMW fighter. It would beat Honda's new Acura division to market by nearly a year. It would arrive 3 years before Lexus. Ford had a plan and was getting a head start on the entire Japanese luxury invasion, and then they got to work on the hurdles facing them. The first problem was the name. GM already sold trucks with the Sierra trim package, and Oldsmobile had the Cutlass Sierra. Same pronunciation, different spelling, a legal and marketing headache. Ford needed something new. Peterson himself chose the solution, Merkur, the German word for Mercury. It was meant to signal European sophistication, a bridge between the old American brand and a new global future. There was just one issue. Nobody in America could pronounce it. Most buyers said Merkur, as in Merca. The correct German pronunciation was closer to Merkur, as in, Mer, you seen this weird European car Ford release? I don't know what this jabroni Lutz was thinking, but it looks friggin' weird. Go Birds. Ford eventually had to include pronunciation instructions in their advertising. If you have to teach customers how to say the name of your brand, something has already gone wrong. The second problem was the engine. The European XR4i's Cologne V6 would have been choked into irrelevance by US emissions regulations. Re-engineering it would have cost a fortune. So Ford reached for what was already on the shelf, the 2.3-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder engine from the Mustang SVO. But there was a catch. The SVO engine came with an intercooler and produced 200 horsepower. The Merkur version, without the intercooler, was detuned to 175. The power was still there, but the refinement was not. The big four-cylinder vibrated at high RPMs. Even liquid-filled engine mounts and specially tuned accessory brackets couldn't fix it. Road testers described it as agricultural. The car handled like a European sports sedan and sounded like a farm tractor. The third problem was weight. American crash safety standards required side impact beams in the doors, stronger bumpers, and other modifications. Just like most people who spend a bit of time in the US, the Merkur XR4Ti gained a bit of weight over its European sibling, 280 pounds to be precise. That's the weight of an entire passenger or two. The fourth problem was one that would ultimately prove fatal. Bob Lutz wanted a separate dealer network, trained salespeople who understood European cars and could sell them to BMW cross shoppers. Peterson said no, as that would be too expensive. Instead, Merkur would be sold through 800 select Lincoln Mercury dealerships. These were showrooms designed to sell overstuffed land yachts to retirees, and now they were being asked to sell turbocharged German sport coupes to yuppies. The salespeople didn't understand the car, they didn't understand the customer, and many of them didn't want to. In early 1985, Ford invited the automotive press to their Romeo Proving Grounds in Michigan. The setup was spectacular, a challenging road course, long straightaways, elevation changes. Ford even flew in Jackie Stewart, the three-time Formula One world champion, at a reasonable cost of $5,000 per day plus first-class tickets from Switzerland. The message was clear. This car is European. This car is serious. The press drove the cars. The reviews were glowing. The XR4Ti hit 60 miles per hour in 7 seconds, ran the quarter mile in 15.5 seconds, and topped out at 129 miles per hour. The handling was praised as genuinely world-class. On that day, in those conditions, Ford's strategy appeared to be working. It wasn't until months later that the truth emerged. The press fleet cars had been, in the words of Ford product launch specialist Jim McCraw, optimized for the best performance. The engines had been blueprinted, every car had been test-driven by an SVO handling expert before any journalist touched the keys, and the acceleration figures from the launch event were not representative of the cars customers would actually buy. When magazines later tested the production XR4Tis on their own tracks, the times were slower, the deception was noted, and trust was eroded. And yet, even with the slower real-world numbers, the XR4Ti was still quick. It still handled beautifully. The core product was good. The market, however, did not care. Ford projected annual sales of 15,000 to 20,000 Merkurs. In 1985, the first year, they sold 8,974. 1986 was a bit better, 13,559. The trend was moving in the right direction. Maybe the brand just needed time to establish itself. Then in 1987, 7,352. And 1988, 6,283. The Merkur XR4Ti was not climbing towards success. Rather, it was falling away from it. What was the problem? While the car itself was competent, the dealer network was a mismatch. Lincoln Mercury salespeople had no interest in selling turbocharged German coupes to customers half the age of their usual buyers. The name was alienating. The engine, while powerful, felt unrefined next to the inline sixes powering competing BMWs. And, most critically, the price kept climbing, from $16,500 at launch to over $19,000 by 1988. At that price point, BMW wasn't a comparison, it was an alternative. There was also the exchange rate. The dollar weakened against the Deutschmark throughout the late 1980s. Every Merkur imported from Germany cost Ford more money. On a car already struggling to sell, the math was getting worse, not better. And then there was the Scorpio. In 1988, Ford added a second Merkur model, the Scorpio, a mid-sized luxury sedan that was meant to be the flagship of the Merkur brand. It was powered by a 2.9-liter V6, which was too small and too weak for a car this heavy, and was priced at over $23,000. That was more than $6,000 above the similarly equipped Mercury Sable. The Sable was sold on the same showroom floor by the same salespeople to the same customers. The Scorpio was a good car, roomy, comfortable, well-designed, but it was competing against its own internal rival at a steep price disadvantage in a dealership that had no incentive to push the more expensive European product. They were having such a hard time selling these cars that Ford even introduced a guaranteed resale value program that would peg trade-in value of the car to similar competitors such as the Mercedes-Benz 190e in order to combat the harsh depreciation on the Merkur models. This did little, if anything, to boost sales. In 2 model years, Ford sold 22,010 Scorpios. Combined with the XR4Ti, total Merkur sales over the brand's entire existence reached roughly 59,000 cars, spread across 5 years. In 1989, with new federal safety regulations looming that would require another costly re-engineering program, Ford made the decision. Merkur was dead. The dealerships took down the silver and black diamond logos. The service base stopped stocking German parts. The brand that Ford spent $50 million creating had lasted less than half of a decade. The Merkur story is laced with what-ifs. What if Peterson had approved Lutz's separate dealer network? A dedicated sales force trained to sell European performance cars might have reached the right buyers. What if Ford had put a real engine in the car? The magnificent Yamaha-built 220 horsepower dual overhead cam V6 that appeared in the 1989 Taurus show, developed right around the same time, would have transformed the XR4Ti into a genuinely compelling machine. The parts existed, the decision just wasn't made. What if the cars just lived under the Mercury brand instead of the Merkur brand? The car could have been the Mercury XR4Ti instead of the Merkur. It had worked before. The German-built Capri sold successfully under the Mercury name. A recognizable brand might have lowered the barrier for skeptical American buyers. And what if Ford had partnered with Mazda on a joint luxury brand? At the time, Ford owned 34% of Mazda, who were already developing its own luxury division called Amati, which was eventually canceled. Pooling resources might have produced something neither company could have built alone. None of these things happened. It would take Ford until 2016, nearly 30 years, to import another European-built performance model to the US. The Focus RS arrived to sold-out dealerships, massive waiting lists, and massive hype, proving there had always been a market for European Ford performance in the United States. The Merkur XR4Ti wasn't a bad car. It was fast, sharp handling, strikingly styled. It could beat a Ferrari to 60 miles per hour. The automotive press genuinely liked it. Bob Lutz, the man who conceived it, would go on to lead Chrysler and then General Motors, a career that proved his instincts were usually right. But a car sold through the wrong dealers, with a name your target market struggles to pronounce, is not enough to save a bad strategy. Today, surviving Merkurs are exceedingly rare. Most Americans have never seen one, and younger generations have most likely never even heard the name Merkur. The few that remain are owned by a small, dedicated group of enthusiasts who understand what the car was supposed to be and what Ford's own decisions prevented it from becoming. A reminder that sometimes the car isn't the problem, the brand around it is.